Everyone knew the iconic scream of Sergeant Carter, but few knew the man in the uniform was actually a prisoner of his own success. Behind the laughs of Gomer Pyle, Frank Sutton was trapped in a secret cage that would eventually cost him everything. How did a real-life war hero and scholar become a victim of the very role that made him a legend? Imagine walking onto a Hollywood soundstage every single morning, stepping into a perfectly pressed military uniform, and screaming yourself hoarse for the amusement of millions, all while carrying the silent, heavy ghosts of actual combat in the Pacific Theater. You are celebrated globally as a comedic genius, yet the very face you show the world has completely erased the deeply intellectual, decorated combat veteran you actually are. To truly understand the tragedy and the triumph of Frank Sutton, we have to transport ourselves back to the television landscape of the 1960s. This was an era defined by extreme cultural contradictions. On one hand, you had the brutal, escalating reality of the Vietnam War broadcasting onto the evening news every single night. On the other hand, the American public was desperately seeking refuge in the innocent, deeply sanitized escapism of primetime network sitcoms. Enter Gomer Pyle, U.S.M.C., a spin-off of the incredibly popular Andy Griffith Show. From 1964 to 1969, this show was an absolute juggernaut of television ratings. It offered a comedic, completely bloodless look at military life, focusing on a sweet but bumbling private and his eternally frustrated, red-faced gunnery sergeant. The man playing that sergeant was Frank Sutton. With his signature flat-top haircut, his bulging eyes, and a voice that could seemingly shatter glass, Sutton became the definitive archetype of the angry military superior. He was the human embodiment of a pressure cooker waiting to explode. But here is why this matters today, and why psychologists and entertainment historians are so fascinated by what we now call the persona paradox. The persona paradox occurs when an individual creates a public mask so powerful, so universally recognized, that it completely suffocates their true identity. The public refuses to accept the real human being because they are utterly addicted to the character. Frank Sutton was not a loudmouth. He was not a one-note caricature. He was a man of profound depth who gave audiences exactly what they wanted, unknowingly sealing himself inside a psychological and professional prison. Let us dive deep into the massive chasm between the fictional Sergeant Carter and the real Frank Sutton. To illustrate this, we must look at three specific, undeniable realities of Sutton's life that were completely eclipsed by his television persona. The first stunning contradiction is his actual military journey. When World War II broke out, Frank Sutton desperately wanted to serve his country. He specifically wanted to be a United States Marine. However, during his medical evaluation, he was rejected by both the Marines and the Navy for a seemingly minor physical trait. He was colorblind. He was explicitly told he could not wear the eagle, globe, and anchor, but he refused to stay home. He enlisted in the United States Army in 1943 and was assigned to the 293rd Joint Assault Signal Company. The irony here is absolutely staggering. The man who was deemed medically unfit to be a Marine would later become the most famous fictional Marine in American history. The second contradiction lies in the sheer brutality of his wartime service. Sergeant Carter on television dealt with misplaced mops, peeling potatoes, and botched parade drills. Frank Sutton in reality took part in 14 distinct amphibious assault landings in the Pacific Theater. 14 times, he waded through the surf into heavily fortified enemy beaches at places like Leyte, Luzon, Bataan, and Corregidor. He saw the kind of relentless, visceral combat that breaks the human mind. He was awarded the Bronze Star and the Purple Heart. He knew the metallic smell of blood, the deafening roar of artillery, and the agonizing trauma of watching friends fall beside him in the sand. The third example of this massive disconnect is his towering intellect. After surviving the unimaginable horrors of the Pacific Theater, this combat-hardened veteran did not return home to seek out quiet anonymity. Instead, he walked through the prestigious gates of Columbia University, one of the most elite Ivy League institutions on the planet. He immersed himself in the School of General Studies, diving headfirst into the complex world of classical theater, speech, and dramatic arts. In 1952, he graduated cum laude, proving himself not just an actor, but a true scholar of the human condition. He was a classically trained, highly sophisticated theater actor who shared the screen with legends in the 1955 Academy Award-winning film Amarty. Yet, Hollywood history violently stripped away his medals and his Ivy League degree, leaving only a screaming cartoon character. This brings us to the counterintuitive reality of immense success, which forms the unyielding bars of his secret cage. Most aspiring actors believe that landing a leading role on a hit network television show is the ultimate finish line. It represents absolute financial security, global fame, and artistic validation. But from a purely psychological and career trajectory perspective, a massive, singular hit can actually be a professional death sentence. This is the dark side of the entertainment machine that nobody wants to talk about. When Frank Sutton perfected the role of Sergeant Carter, he simply did it too well. His performance was so visceral, so physically committed, and so endlessly entertaining that the industry executives collectively lost their imagination. They could no longer look at Frank Sutton and see a man capable of performing Shakespeare, or a gritty detective in a noir thriller, or a complex, grieving father in a family drama. They only saw a vein-popping drill instructor. The cognitive dissonance for a highly trained actor in this position is agonizing. Imagine spending years mastering the subtle micro-expressions of dramatic acting, studying the great playwrights, and surviving the horrors of 14 combat landings, only to be told that your only value to the world is to widen your eyes and yell at a fictional country boy. Sutton was professionally paralyzed by his own brilliance. Furthermore, in the era before massive syndication, royalties provided lifelong, generational wealth. An actor whose show was canceled had to find new work immediately just to survive. But when Gomer Pyle ended its historic run in 1969, the phone stopped ringing for Frank Sutton, the dramatic actor. He was only offered variations of the exact same angry, loudmouth character. The industry effectively told a brilliant, sensitive, decorated war hero that his real self was no longer marketable. He was forced to carry the ghost of Sergeant Carter into every single audition room, watching as casting directors giggled at the memory of his sitcom, rather than engaging with the complex human being sitting right in front of them. It is a highly specific, unique form of psychological torture to be universally loved for a mask you are never allowed to take off. To understand how he built this cage, and eventually how he utilized it, we have to analyze the technical mechanics of his performance and the silent burden he carried behind the scenes. Acting at that level is not merely memorizing lines on a page. It is a full-body athletic and psychological sport. Sutton constructed the character of Sergeant Carter using the precise technical skills he honed at Columbia University. He utilized extreme vocal projection, strictly controlling his diaphragm to produce a booming, abrasive bark that somehow never actually damaged his vocal cords over 5 years of filming. He manipulated his physical posture, maintaining a rigid, tension-filled stance that communicated explosive, kinetic energy even when he was completely silent in a scene. This level of physical tension, sustained for 12 to 14 hours a day under the blazing hot studio lights of a soundstage, takes an immense, measurable toll on the human cardiovascular system. He was literally stressing his own heart on a daily basis for the sake of American comedy. But the technical brilliance of his acting was only part of the story. The actionable, transformative reality of his life was how he chose to use this inescapable persona. In the winter of 1966, at the absolute height of the Vietnam War, the American public was becoming deeply polarized and fractured. Sutton saw young men being shipped off to a nightmare he understood all too well. While other celebrities stayed safely in the Hollywood Hills or engaged in domestic protests, Frank Sutton made a decision that defied all industry logic. He took his own money, he refused any corporate or studio sponsorship, and he flew directly into the active combat zones of Southeast Asia. He did not go as a protesting celebrity. He went as Sergeant Carter. Over the course of just 8 days, Sutton subjected himself to a punishing schedule, performing 56 separate one-man comedy shows for the deployed Marines. He traveled to remote, dangerous bases and heavily fortified military hospitals. Why would a classically trained dramatic actor exhaust himself playing a sitcom character in a sweltering jungle? Because, as Sutton later confessed to journalists, He knew exactly what it meant to watch a buddy die in a rice paddy with the stink and the filth. He knew those young boys were terrified. And he knew that the sight of the ridiculous, blustering Sergeant Carter would give them 20 minutes of genuine, healing laughter in the middle of hell. He explicitly weaponized his own typecasting to serve his country a second time. The United States Marine Corps was so profoundly moved by his immense selflessness that they officially made him an honorary sergeant. The exact military branch that had rejected him as a young man finally embraced him as a legendary brother. When we look at real-world applications of this phenomenon, we see a tragic pattern of brilliant performers entirely destroyed by their own iconic creations. The entertainment machine demands easily recognizable commodities, not complex human beings. For Frank Sutton, the devastating reality of this trap became brutally clear in the early 1970s. Unable to secure the rich, layered dramatic film roles he rightfully deserved, he was forced to return to the stage, but often in dinner theaters and smaller regional playhouses rather than Broadway. He hit the road, relentlessly touring across the country, desperately trying to find an audience that would appreciate his raw acting talent rather than just waiting for him to yell his catchphrases. He threw his entire soul into the grueling, unforgiving schedule of live theatrical production. But the human body always keeps a terrifying score. The years of carrying the immense physical tension of his iconic character, combined with the extreme stress of endless travel, the lingering, unspoken trauma of World War II, and the quiet, persistent heartbreak of unfulfilled artistic potential, finally culminated in a devastating physical collapse. On June 28, 1974, in Shreveport, Louisiana, Frank Sutton was actively preparing for a performance in a comedy play titled Love. He was just 50 years old. In his dressing room, far away from the network cameras and the cheering television crowds, his overworked heart simply gave out. A massive, sudden heart attack claimed the life of a man who had survived 14 amphibious invasions and conquered the heights of Hollywood, only to be worked to death in the long, inescapable shadows of his own fame. Frank Sutton was a man of magnificent, heartbreaking contradictions. He was an Ivy League intellectual who played a simpleton, a genuine combat hero who pretended to be a frustrated paper pusher, and a deeply compassionate, sensitive artist who wore the heavy mask of a tyrant. His life forces us to confront the heavy price of public success and the dangerous nature of fame. We frequently build cages out of our greatest achievements, and sometimes those cages become entirely impossible to escape. He gave the world endless laughter and brought comfort to soldiers in their darkest hours, but he paid for that gift with his own identity. His legacy is not just a loud, recognizable voice on a vintage television screen. It is a profound, enduring testament to duty, silent sacrifice, and the incredibly heavy burden of entertaining the world. But if you think Frank Sutton's secret cage was shocking, wait until you hear about the devastating reality behind another classic sitcom star who was pushed to the absolute psychological edge by the Hollywood machine, whose entire off-screen life was a psychological thriller completely hidden by a laugh track. Click the next video right now, because the dark side of television nostalgia is far deeper and more terrifying than you ever imagined.